Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Jerry Levitan. He is a writer, a columnist, a broadcaster, an adjudicator, a filmmaker, a lecturer, a lawyer, and a lot more. He's an author, columnist in the Toronto Star. He's written about 14 pieces over the course of the last little while. And the most recent one, The City is Broken and It's Time Voters Demand More of Our Leaders. He's written about municipal politics, provincial politics, federal politics. We need a little roundup of what's going on because it just seems like our world's a little crazy right now, Jerry. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Very well. Happy birthday, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Birthdays are such a pleasant treat, particularly when you get older. Yeah. No, the world is, hey, I don't think there's anyone who would tell you that things are, going well anywhere.
Yeah.
There's just such a decaying feeling that things are out of control and we're just spinning in our personal lives and with respect to governments.
Well, let's start at the small and then get up to the large. Your piece about the city that it's broken and we need more from our leaders. We're at the 1 year anniversary of our new mayor in Toronto, Olivia Chow. What do you think is wrong with the city of Toronto?
First of all, you have difficulty going from one place to another. I went to New York about a month or so ago for the weekend with my daughter to see a play, and at the U.S. Customs at Pearson, the stern customs officer said to me, "Why are you going to New York?" And I said, "To see a play with my daughter." And he said, "Well, it's a long distance to travel to see a play." And I said, "Well, it's a shorter distance than driving from Etobicoke to Scarborough." And he said, "Okay, go ahead." Right? Whether you have a car, have the use of a car, or don't have a car, whether you're a cyclist, whether you're a pedestrian, whether you use the GO train or the TTC, it is a burden to travel in Toronto for work, for pleasure. If you don't have much disposable income, you're really having difficulty getting jobs, going to work, going to school, going to the universities.
One of your
And
paragraphs was really quite interesting. Talk to teenagers and young people, and you'll hear frustration, resentment, and fear for their futures. Where will I live? Everything in Toronto is too pricey. Can I really have a career and raise a family here? These are the things they say every day.
But it's true. I don't think anyone who listens to your program or any program can or would dispute it. And what I find so compellingly frustrating is when you hear politicians, whether it's the mayor or city council now, they talk as though whenever there's a crisis, wherever there's an issue that demonstrates that people in Toronto are not living in a very fruitful or happy way, they talk as though, well, they're just dealing with things, as opposed to, here is our plan, here is the vision, here are the things we have to do. It's always patronizing and condescending and manipulative. We had the flood in Toronto, and I was my household was a victim, as many others, where a basement was flooded, quite significantly. It's as if it was a surprise to the mayor and city council. And okay, we got to study this and see, what we can do to fix certain municipal services quicker and better. This is a surprise. How is it a surprise? We've been talking about climate change and the poor infrastructure in the city of Toronto for an awful long time.
Well, you're
And
suggesting it's going beyond flooding and traffic congestion because of construction. You're saying our social fabric is being torn apart by blustering bursts of battle cries and hate, spreading paralysis of action on the part of our leaders, important institutions, and authorities. Really? You
but
think our social fabric is being torn apart?
absolutely, Absolutely. Does anyone really think that as time goes on, with all these horrendous issues that people face, particularly young people who feel hopelessness, um, that people are going to accept this? This is how disruption, social disruption, evolves. This is how right-wing authoritarian politicians gain control historically. How do people accept rampant inflation of food prices, manipulative practices of shrinkage of products and difficulties to feed your family? How can people accept not being able to afford to rent, to own their homes? How can young people expect a positive, optimistic future when their tuitions are high? They can't, they don't know where they can live. They don't know what job prospects they're going to have after spending 3 or 4 years in a trade school or a college or a university. That's the stuff, that's the dark matter, that's the fuel for social disruption. And we see it, without picking sides on the Middle East issue. Look at how these, if you want to call them protests, look at how it's created paralysis at the university level, in street protests. One of the things in my recent article, I talked about how an area in North York it had masked protesters, if you want to call them that, marching around a neighborhood that was very significantly populated by Holocaust survivors, knocking on doors and ranting hateful messages. I grew up, when I saw the video that was posted in the Toronto Star. It's where I grew up. It's the street that I used to live on, and police officers are sitting on bicycles, observing things. I suppose if things got a hand, they might get off their bicycles and do something. But how is that acceptable? I mean, can you imagine any other neighborhood in Toronto of a different ethnic or national or racial background or gender background? Would that have been acceptable? So it just shows that our leaders, our politicians, people in institutional positions of significance, they don't know what to do, and they're afraid to make tough decisions. And if you can't make tough decisions in difficult times, someone's going to come on the scene with really strong answers to press all the emotional buttons. And next thing we know, we wake up in an authoritarian world. And look at the United States. It's unbelievable. It really is. For people of my age, your age, other ages who grew up in the post-World War II era, all the difficulties from whether it was the Vietnam War or whether it was separatism and the existential threat of Canada with separatism. We struggled with and observed all these challenges that we had. So we have a perspective when we see paralysis of leadership, when we see protests that are out of control, when we see demagogues come out and say all these things. It's a fearful thing. Anyways, I could go on, but the United States, for us as Canadians, we can observe the disintegration of a great country in real time. In history, in human history, we've never been able to do that, but we're watching it right now.
Disintegration.
Yeah.
I think the U.S. is, well, let's come back to the U.S. in a couple of minutes.
Sure.
Some time on it, but disintegration in real time, that's pretty strong language. But coming back to Toronto, you really think we're broken? We have civil unrest. Our leaders aren't taking strong action. We're allowing marauding groups of protesters to frighten, humiliate, threaten whole communities of religious people? You think it's that bad?
Yeah, I mean, it hasn't erupted in a way that have brought significant awareness to the general population. But yeah, I mean, look at how U of T and TMU and other places were at a time of going into graduation and ceremonies and things like that. It was like as if people didn't know what to do.
So
Um,
we had a fiscal conservative, reasonably strong mayor a year ago, replaced by a left wing NDP, but a very popular mayor now. So we've gone through sort of an ideological change. Do you think it's ideology? Do you think it's the just the times that we live in? What do you think the cause of this
it,
situation is?
it's not. I don't think it's ideology. I don't get the sense from Mayor Chow that she's espousing ideology. She definitely has a perspective, being a longtime NDPer and someone with those sentiments. And when you say a strong mayor in John Tory, well, if from my perspective, you go back to starting with Rob Ford and then John Tory, many of the problems we face today, when you talk about fiscally conservative, many of the problems we face today is because of inaction in that decade and a half on the part of city council. It's not just the mayors, the city council. I mean, it takes a long time, as you know, to plan a transportational system in a major urban setting, to implement those things. It takes 10 years, something like that. So the reason there's such a difficult and frustrating transportational system in Toronto right now is because of inaction for a decade or so. And I get it. I understand why council and mayors in the past didn't do it, because to do it, you had to spend a lot of money. And if you had to spend a lot of money, it meant that property taxes had to go up and maybe cut certain things that you wouldn't want to do. But those are the difficult choices that governments have to make, that politicians have to make. And if they don't make the right choices, people suffer, our children suffer, our grandchildren suffer.
And so, what are some of those difficult choices that aren't being addressed and made today?
It's a little, as I said, the difficult choices a decade or so ago was to tell people this is the transportational issues that we face in the future. So we have to do certain things. And politicians of all stripes have to come together. And sure, you're not going to agree on everything and say, okay, we recognize that there's going to be a crisis. So we have to do something. And to do it, we're going to have to raise property taxes. Not that anybody wants that to happen, right? I mean, everybody's struggling to pay bills. But just like
Mayor Chow raised property taxes, I think almost 10%. And
yeah.
there was a huge outcry against it.
Well, I wouldn't call it a huge outcry. People have carried on, right? But
So you think the populace in general accepted the fact that property taxes, I live in Mississauga, property taxes on a mill rate basis, on a value basis in Mississauga are twice what they are in Toronto.
Yeah. Well, as I said, it's the result of inaction on a decade and a half. And I'm no economist, and I haven't studied the issue and to the details of costing and things like that. But I don't think it takes an economist or a genius to know that if you don't take remedial steps with something that is going to be a problem, then in the future it's going to cost a heck of a lot more. You know, if you don't replace a couple of panels at the science center, you know, in 2003, you know it's going to be worse in 2024. I mean, every household knows it. Every apartment dweller knows it. If you're going to just leave the mold on your wall for 6, 7, 8 years, um,
Something's going to happen.
it'll be more than just painting it. You're going to have to put new drywall on. These are like fundamentally, rudimentally, you know, simple concepts. So if the whole point of my article and previous articles is if you're going to run for office,
Be ready to make the tough decisions.
yeah, you have a choice to make. You can either just run for office and, you know, and it becomes show business for ugly people, and believe your press releases and use jingoistic, you know, phrases to sort of capture a mood of people who don't really have a lot of time to look into the choices they have. Or you can say, I want to make the world a little bit better for my kids, for my parents, who are seniors, for my grandkids, so that we can make something of our environment.
Jerry, you wrote an article a while ago about a lot of horror films, which I was surprised by, and you suggested that social media, that algorithms, might be those monsters. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back, and I'm going to ask Jerry about his comparison between some of the horror films that was scared at the most in the past and social media. Stay with us, everyone. Back in just 2 minutes with Jerry Levitan. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Jerry Levitan. He is just an incredibly interesting gentleman, a polymath, involved in a whole bunch of different things. A Renaissance man, a filmmaker, an author, a columnist, a really smart guy, very involved in politics. But this one article, "The Monsters Have Arrived. How will we respond? Modern tools of communication, data, and manipulation, sounds and images to trigger voter emotions, insecurity, and fears create seemingly insurmountable threats to our social norms and way of life." And you have a picture from the 1968 film Night of the Living Dead. Throughout popular culture, the concept that we are all manipulated pawns for ulterior and nefarious purposes that require monumental forces of will to overcome is not new. Tell me, and you go on and you talk about Bride of the Monster and Dracula and Abbott Costello Meet Frankenstein, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. What's going on here? You go through and list about 10 different popular culture films and the concept of manipulated pawns, and you're saying we're there now? Seriously? Really?
Oh, totally, without the fun of those B movies and the A movies that were horror and science fiction movies. I mean, you know, what part of our world today doesn't seem bizarre to people? You know, like take a walk on TikTok. You know, I have a 12-year-old daughter now, and you know, so I'm on TikTok and I look at it to a large extent just to see what's going on for younger people and the like. And it's a walk in a horror movie. You know, fake images done, you know, exquisitely well. I mean, our environment. I mean, the flood we had in Toronto and the GTA last week. You know, it seems to be recognized that it's a function of climate change and that you know, that outpouring of rain that we had, and you know that, well, it's to be expected that storms are going to get worse and worse. I mean, how many horror films, good and bad, over the last 40 or 50 years? That's the theme. And zombies, look at the parading, you know, groups of people around the world, you know, marching or protesting on a variety of subjects. Some of them are right, but it's just this mass of people being compelled to do certain things, some of which make sense. I mean, it's absolutely right to protest, particularly in a democratic society, but just swarms of people, driving on the Gardner or whatever, bumper to bumper, a gazillion trucks. I mean, it's a scene out of, take a look at any of these zombie movies. It's the same thing. There's one really good film it was a Brad Pitt movie not that long ago, called World War Z, and I'm saying Z because it was an American film. And it starts off like that, people driving around, and all of a sudden it's bumper to bumper, and all of a sudden there are these hordes of zombies, on the highway smashing things. I wasn't that long ago. I was on the 401 going east, and traffic was abysmal. It was about 2 months ago. It was just abysmal, like it is every day. And I saw a very pricey black SUV. Um, it was a high-end SUV, and this person was swerving in and out of, like, just a few feet of distance between cars. And as I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, there's going to be an accident. And sure enough, in all my years, and I've had a few years on me, I've never seen an accident of consequence on the highway. And this guy sideswiped a car that made the car spin about 6 or 7 times, and that car ended up on the side. Now, we're traveling, and I called 911, and that was a ridiculous conversation because it was as if I was a pain in the neck to the person. So I don't know what happened there. But what was obvious was A, the person was reckless, and B, the frustration that this person had just driving. Those are actions of impulsive behavior. It's zombie-like. And look at all of the random violence in Toronto, where there are stabbings out of nowhere, on a bus or whatever. Kids beating up other kids, stabbing kids, shootings. So much of it is just impulsive behavior.
But you're blaming, it would appear, what, media and social media. Let me quote you. Modern tools of communication, data and manipulation, sounds and images to trigger voter emotions, insecurities and fears create seemingly insurmountable threats to our social norms and way of life. Fascists, warmongers, demagogues, autocrats, and authoritarians came to power without these technologies. Imagine the potential now.
Yeah.
So it's, lots of people over the years have blamed, the films that we're watching or the music that we're listening to for what's going on. And we've said, oh, you're crazy. Now you're saying, no, this communication, the data manipulation, the sounds and images are insurmountable threats to our social norms.
Sure. The difference, Brian, is that in the day, there would be a record album, whether it was Twisted Sister or whatever, and you'd have parents protesting. The album cover is terrible. We got to stop it. We got to censor it. Or there'd be a movie showing violence or whatever, a horror film, in whether it was the 60s or the 70s. Hey, I go back to when the Three Stooges were taken off, Saturday morning cartoons because the concept was that it was, kids would pattern and mimic what the Three Stooges did. Going to a movie, paying a ticket, and sitting there and watching a film, has a variety of impacts on people, or listening to an album does. But we're now in hyperdrive now with social media. I'm not talking about, censorship of artistic endeavors, whether they're good or bad, but TikTok, and the rest of social media, but TikTok in particular, because it's so instantaneous and effective, particularly with AI and those kind of things. You don't need really to use your brain very much. It's just instantaneous, whether you're posting or creating stuff on TikTok. or just watching things and how images and little clips are being streamed to you because of your algorithms. It doesn't require much thought. And for people who aren't given to really look at things carefully, that's what they see. That's what they think, you know? And
Quote,
yeah.
you quote Albert Einstein. In 1933, Albert Einstein described to colleagues the then state of affairs in Germany as one of, quote, psychic distemper in the masses. Psychic distemper in the masses. Looking at the world today, would that not be an apt description of our common malaise? We think you think we have psychic distemper.
Yeah.
Explain psychic distemper.
Well, distemper is a word that describes, a physical, malaise. Again, using the United, and we have symptoms of this in Canada too, and I don't know where we're heading, but look at the United States. Look at these rallies. The Trumpian rallies. The Republican Party has become, it's so non-factual and so harsh and cruel and just hateful. Like the messages are just so cynical and harmful to a social a society that wants to achieve good things for people. Is that not sick, what we see? It's like I said, we're watching the disintegration of a great country in real time, and there may be hope, and hopefully there is hope. But if the Democrats get in, but we're watching it. Have you seen part of that Republican convention?
I watched too much of it.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because I went to graduate school in the United States, and when I went to do my master's in the United States, I had this huge respect for that country, and it really was the pinnacle of democracy, the shining hill on the sea, the shining city on the hill, as I think it was Ronald Reagan described it. And what happened 3.5 years ago with January 6th and the denial of the election, and then certainly what's happened with all these cases recently, and then the attitude that some people have toward democracy and respect for elections and et cetera. It really calls into question whether that great democracy is anywhere close to what it used to be.
True.
It certainly lost respect around the world.
True. And you know what that problem is floating around Europe and South America and other places around the world. It's not just specific to the United States. And look, I was a candidate in the last provincial election for the Liberals, and I knocked on doors, and it was the post-pandemic time. And there were some scary people out there who would say things to me that were shocking, at first I would sort of engage with them, and then, I didn't, I knocked on one door once because one of my team said, "Hey, there's a woman wearing a Fleetwood Mac t-shirt. You should speak to her." And because of my background and without getting into it, rock music and whatever. So I went up to her, and she seemed about my age and seemed like a funky woman. And I said, "Hey, I thought, you had a Fleetwood Mac shirt. I thought we'd talk about music, and I'm the candidate." And she said, do you think that that COVID is real? And do you believe that the vaccine was created in the basement laboratory of, I forget which politician, she said. And I said, yeah, no, COVID's real. And I don't believe that. And she said, well, we have nothing to talk about. And she slammed the door in my face. I could give you about 10 other examples, of people just espousing, conspiracy theories right out of the United States, the right wing, theories. And that was in Toronto, in good Toronto. And, look at what some of the leaders in Canada are saying now and how they approach things. I remember the days when I don't want to sound like an older person talking about the good old days, but I remember the days where there'd be strong disagreements when Pierre Trudeau was in power. And he definitely elicited strong reactions, good and bad, in people. But where at the end of the day, when there was something that was clearly of importance to Canadians, whether it was Bob Stanfield or Ed Broadbent or whoever, they got together and they came up with some kind of consensus of how we approach things. That does not happen anymore. Not in
The
the United
visceral
States.
hatred between our prime minister and Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the official opposition, is astounding. And I read the story in the paper just a week or so ago. You may have read it as well. That Justin Trudeau used to relay the story that he and his brothers were with their father dining in the parliamentary restaurant on Parliamentary Hill, and they were making fun of Joe Clark, who was sitting nearby. And his father, the prime minister at the time, Pierre Trudeau, said no and took them over to meet Joe Clark, and they ended up dining together and chatting for about an hour or so, and became good friends. And Pierre Trudeau's point was, and Justin asked his father, you make fun of him. Why did you object to us making fun of him? And he says, well, I don't make fun of him. I argue with him when I need to, but he's a very good man, and you shouldn't treat him that way. And I wanted to show you that he was a very good man. I just can't imagine Justin Trudeau and Pierre Poilievre sitting down for lunch and discussing things reasonably. I can't imagine Donald Trump and either Kamala Harris or Joe Biden sitting down and discussing things reasonably. The fact that they didn't even shake hands at the debate, I think, is astonishing. And I'm reminded again of, and you've seen it probably as well numerous times, of John McCain defending Barack Obama as not being an Arab when one of John McCain's supporters suggested that he was not native born and couldn't be trusted. Something's gone. Something's different. And let me quote you from your article. Looking to the future, a revolution is needed in our schools, colleges, and universities to better teach our children how to research, read, and think. We need to give them the tools to succeed, evolve, and survive in a world that has spun off course. They need to understand the meaning and the gift of democracy, its history, and fragility, because the slide is here and will become more treacherous day by day.
Well, I invite anybody to disagree with that. If they do, then that's their prerogative. But I think it's pretty correct. If you speak, like I said in one of my articles, we speak to younger people these days, there's a hopelessness there, a cynicism there, a frustration. And as they get older, if they can't get a job, if they can't find a place to live in Toronto, they're going to be angry, right? And when you're angry and you feel hopeless and you're young, that doesn't bode well for a harmonious society.
We're going to take a break and come back with our guest in just 2 minutes, Jerry Levitan. Stay with us, everyone. Interesting set of columns that he's written in the Toronto Star that we're chatting about today. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Jerry Levitan. Jerry, you've got a fascinating career. Tell everyone a little bit about it, because you're an author now. You've been a musician. You've been a filmmaker. You've been a columnist. You've been a politician. You really, have done it all.
Yeah, sounds like I'm a great guy, right? You know, it was never a plan, but you know, look, you know, much of it started when I barged into John Lennon and Yoko Ono's hotel room in Toronto in 1969. I was a Beatle freak, like so many kids of that era, and he let me hang. They both let me hang with them for the day and into the night and do an interview, and which many years later I turned into a short animated film that was nominated for an Oscar, won an Emmy, wrote a book, a best-selling book about that experience. I've written another book. I went into law because I wanted to be a politician like Pierre Trudeau, who was also a hero of mine back then. I didn't want to be a lawyer just to be a lawyer. Um, I led the constitutional challenge against the Sunday shopping laws, uh, and was the only one to succeed in the Court of Appeal for video stores, and then ultimately for bookstores. And I was a third year lawyer or something like that. So you know, it's to me, my career and the things that I've done, you know, even when I'm talking about it now, just who was that guy? It just part of my nature. I was always wanting to do things that were creative or fun or interesting, and I just didn't want to be a lemming, neither as a kid or as an adult. So
And why have you decided to write these series of columns for the Toronto Star now?
I was asked after the last election, I was asked by someone at the Star if I would write an honest column about my experience as a candidate. So I did. I mean, you know, my answer was sure. I have no problem with honesty. I did, and it got a big reaction, and I was encouraged to keep doing it, and so I did. So in the last 2 years or so, 13, 14 columns, and I have no shortage of ideas for columns. I have at any given time, I have a list of about 10 or 15 ideas for a column. But, you know, as um, you know, there's just so much, you know, a columnist or a writer, you know, can spin out. Anyways, so it's just, you know, I'm no stranger to writing. I don't use chat. What was it? Chat GBT. My brain is too cluttered that I can't remember those acronyms. But you know, I like writing. You know, like the idea of using an app that'll write something for me is just, for me, it's laughable. Like I enjoy putting my thoughts, you know, in a written, you know, form.
Do
It's like
people comment back to you? Do you think that people are motivated by your writings to think more deeply about some issues?
I've received a lot of response from people,
Excellent.
say people I know, but people I don't know, like who have reached out, like from all realms. And you know, I've received some hate, but I'm no stranger to that. When I was a candidate, if you're a candidate, you're generally going to get, you know, some nasty comments. But yeah, no, I've received a lot of
You
reach
wrote
outs.
a, you wrote a column with the title, "We Are Suffering the Consequences of Mass Ignorance." Why do we have mass ignorance today?
Well, people spit out, um, you know, positions and statements. Many people do that aren't borne out by the facts. They haven't bothered to, you know, when you comment on geopolitical issues by throwing out a phrase without the context of actually having read about the historical context or, you know, the geopolitical context, then you're just spitting out words that mean mean nothing, you know, and usually cause problems for people. Um, I think that's true, and I'm not talking about just one issue. Like And that's, again, you go back to social media and you look whether it's Instagram or Facebook or even LinkedIn or particularly TikTok, people say things that just have no basis in reality. It's fiction, and when it's used to spread hate or disruption or hurt people, then that's a dangerous thing, and that's really where we're headed. And these, politicians in every country that we have that is around the world that's democratic or tries to be democratic, you see how there are forces that know how to manipulate that really well. They get technicians and people who understand algorithms, and they do their polling, and what is the buzzword, what's the phrase that can be used that can elicit an instantaneous emotional, a visceral reaction, whether it has anything to do with facts or not, but to press those buttons. And that's the state of politics today.
But at the same time, people are voting with their feet to not vote. Our turnouts are dismal and declining. The last Mississauga by-election was only a 25% turnout. I think the turnout in the Toronto by-election went up from the general election, but was still, something 30-something percent. The last provincial election was, I think it was somewhere around 35 or 40% turnout. So we don't even have half of the people in our electoral population, not even our total population, obviously, but the people that are over 18 and have the Canadian citizenship and the right to vote are voting. What's gone wrong if, everything that's happening that you describe is happening, and yet people don't care to go out and cast their vote in democracy?
Well, it's a function to a large extent of how people view politicians cynically, and they're right. It's been a long time since we've seen leadership around, on the total scale, whether it's municipal, provincial, or federal, where there are very few politicians that you could say, yeah, okay, I disagree or agree or whatever, but there's someone who's in it for the right reason and whatever. So people are cynical, and I understand that, and I get it. Hey, I'm cynical, right? And I've been there. I've tried to get into office. You have too, right? You can't help but be cynical. But does that mean you either don't vote or you vote for someone just because you want to stick it to the person in power? That's a recipe for getting a worse result. And democracy is all about choice. And sometimes the choices aren't great. The U.S. is such a perfect example. Like, before Biden resigned, which was the good, or to say that he was going to withdraw from the race, which was the right decision, clearly. But before then, okay, good guy, devoted, politician and public servant for decades and decades. Yeah, good guy, but he's old and clearly not functioning, at the rate you want someone to function as president of the United States. And on the other hand, that guy, right?
Yeah, you talked about the Republican convention and his speech particularly. Well, frankly, J.D. Vance's speech, but then Eric Trump's speech, which was that could have been a horror film. It was the darkest speech that I think I've ever heard anyone make. But this hour and 33-minute rambling, incoherent, other than the first 10 minutes that was on the teleprompter, tirade. And it was interesting because some of the commentators were saying, most of us only get clips of a Trump rally. Rarely do any of us watch a whole rally, and that she described that all these rallies really are very similar to this, and it's great, red meat for the masses. They love it, but when the rest of us listen to it for an hour and a half or longer, which I understood was longer than a regular average film, we see how nuts the guy is, how how it's like that crazy uncle that you would have that would go on and on and on about all the problems in the world, and it incoherent, didn't fit together litany of issues over the course of an hour and a half. It was, I'm a political junkie. I almost fell asleep. And at the end of it, I was going, what the heck is this guy talking about? It was terrible.
Hey, yeah, you parade Hulk Hogan, right? In a political convention, like think of the mentality involved in something like that. Like, really? You know, yeah, no, it's not good. And I hope the Democrats take over the House and the Senate, and Kamala Harris becomes president, and maybe, there'll be, not maybe, if they come in, there's hope for a lot more rationality and back to what governments really should be, which is represent all the people.
I really worry that we're in for 4 months of more racism and misogynism, prejudice than we've heard and seen in a long, long time, though. We're going to take a break and come back with some concluding comments in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Jerry Levitan is my guest tonight. He's now a columnist in the Toronto Star. He's in the past a filmmaker, an author, a lawyer, etc. But his columns in the Toronto Star are really very interesting. Jerry, I got to ask you, I really worry, and you've talked about this in regards to young people today and the housing crisis in some of your articles, but we have left our children, the next generation, with unaffordable housing, such that you talked about the lack of confidence in their ability to buy a home in Toronto. I was at a dinner just 2 weeks ago with a whole bunch of young people that were almost mad, like really mad about their lack of hope to ever own a home anywhere within an hour's drive of their job in downtown Toronto. Debt that is at an all-time high, deficits that are an all-time high, crime that seems to be escalating, and AI, you talked about ChatGPT, AI that, some people are saying are going to take away a lot of entry-level jobs and do the junior legal work, the junior accounting work, the junior research work. Taxes at an unbelievable high. Climate change that we've been talking about. We've left our kids in a pretty crappy situation. What's the result of all that? I talked to a guy from Vancouver that runs something about intergenerational inequity, and he said that we could have civil unrest. You suggest that sort of too. What do you think the future is?
Well, unless we get our act together, that's the future. It'll be everybody out for themselves. And that's why at the end of the day, just speaking about, being a Canadian, we need better politicians. We need better people running for office, quality people who have experience, people who are thinkers, people who have ideas and are in politics, not just to, be proud of their name in the media or whatever, but people who are doing it because they want to make the world a better place, and that requires people of intelligence, of integrity, of some degree of vision as to what they want to accomplish. Many years ago, I was approached by the Federal Liberal Party to run in Toronto as a young lawyer who had, a lot of splashy cases, and it was Paul Martin who called me to meet with him to talk about running. And I told him, being the cocky lawyer that I was, I said, well, my hero is Pierre Trudeau, and I want to meet him. And it was arranged for me to go to Montreal and meet Paul Martin, and then after that, meet Pierre Trudeau. And we had a great conversation, and I became friends with him till his death. And at one point, he said, we're sitting on the couch together underneath the Einstein Peace Award that he got. And he slapped my knee and he said, so why do you want to run? And it took me off guard because I got the call And it's not like I thought about, what my platform would be or why I'm running. And I rambled like an idiot, like espoused things like the Trudeau Liberals were saying. And he smiled, a classic Pierre Trudeau smile. And he said, look, if you're going to run, find a reason, even if it's to get a post office in front of your grandmother's nursing homes. Otherwise, you're like all these bums. And that comment to this day stayed with me. And that's really the bottom line. If you're going to run for a reason, and obviously a good reason, whether it's small or big, because the object of it is to make the world a better place, not to see your face on CP24, but to make the world a better place. And if you look at the stream of politicians in every party, there are good ones, there are great ones, and there are a lot of just mediocre, not so great people who objectives aren't really that laudable. And that's what we need. We need better quality people of all stripes, young, older, the middle range, different backgrounds, but people who are thinkers and who have objectives that are to make the world better for all of us, not just a particular group or a particular philosophy.
Jerry, I couldn't agree with you more. I really appreciate you coming on and quoting Pierre Elliott Trudeau and his comments to you. We could go on and talk about these issues for quite a long time, and you're a filmmaker, so I'd really like to ask you, about a connection, if I could, but we can't talk about it today because we've run out of time. But I was with a very successful music producer, and we were talking about music, and they said that to be a successful musician, comparable to what you said about a politician, you've got to have a message. You've got to want to motivate, inspire your people. You just can't want to make a hit song. And he said it was interesting. He said that Taylor Swift has a message, unlike a lot of other people. She's a great songwriter and has a message in her music, and that's what resonates. That's why people remember her lyrics, because she has a message. And he said that the vast majority of musicians don't have a message. They just want to create a hit song. All they care about is the money and the power and the stature. She has a message. I'm not sure if that's right. You're the culture expert. I'd love to chat with you about that. It's interesting that you then said you got to have to want to do something to be successful in politics. That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thank you, Jerry Levitan. Happy birthday. Really appreciate you joining us. I'm going to have to look out, and everyone else will, for your columns in the Toronto Star. Good night.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks.